Hi there, everybody. We're having some technical difficulties this morning, so what I'm doing is reading, recording this, and then I will read it to you guys, and we'll have a watch party, as you can see. So let's get back. Let me show you the cover. The cover is called Deadly Election. It's by Arthur Crandon. There we go. There we go. By Arthur Crandon. It takes place it starts off in World War II and goes from there in the Philippines. So, I'm going to, it's at the end of World War II. I'm going to read start at chapter 1 and read from there. And I hope everybody likes it. I'll get this situated so I can read it better. Okay. Now then. Okay. Maybe there. All right, chapter 1. Philippines, late 1944, with nearly 200, General MacArthur kept his promise. He returned to the 1,000 American troops. Relentlessly, they scoured the countryside, freeing the villages and hunting down the remaining Japanese soldiers. Only a few of the weary Japanese surrendered. Most preferred to die in hopeless battle. The disgraced Japanese general Yamashita was in flight. Deserted by their own government and senior officers. There we go. It was wobbling too much. Okay. Deserted by their own government and senior officers, remnants of his army were hiding gold and stolen treasures looted from their conquered lands all over Southeast Asia. Wherever they could, they dug holes in the ground, stuffed the basements of deserted houses, or even secreting their hoards into secluded caves of the mountains. The American rescue came too late for Virgil and his village. They were forced to help the fleeing Japanese troops and murdered for their trouble. Within days of the massacre, the liberating Yanks paraded through the streets of the historic Spanish-style town of Vigan, and I may be totally pronouncing that wrong, 100 miles north, to the cheers of the war-weary locals. More than a week earlier, the American liberators had landed, but had not yet reached the provinces. The Japanese conscripts busied themselves blocking up the cave entrance to hide the gold and cover up their murders. Then they were on their way. Any evidence they were ever there was now hidden, hopefully forever. Rested after a good meal and a few hours of sleep, the ragged group made slow progress through the lush tropical jungles of the northern Philippines. Kodama spoke with his sergeant. Do you think we can make it to Subic? That's the nearest port. There's no point going to Manila. The Yanks control the bay. Maybe we'll find a small boat in one of the harbors in Tarlac. We'll have to take our chances. The round-eyed bastards are moving fast. If we don't get off the island soon, we'll have no chance. The sergeant nodded. We'll have to try. There's no other way. Dense vegetation gave way to a clearing which opened out onto a narrow road running alongside the shoreline. 100 yards away, they could see the blue sea and hear the waves breaking on the rocks. Forest vegetation gave way to more open land. They had to be more careful now. The troop crouched down and scurried across the track, regrouping in the shade of the large outcrops and coconut palms at the top of the beach. The sergeant gathered them together. Stay off the roads. We have no idea how close the Yanks are. We must move along the coast using the boulders as shelter. Keep low. If we're seen, the locals will attack us or contact the enemy. We can't take chances. As they skirted San Fernandino, La Union, their luck ran out. The sun was at its hottest now. These temperatures didn't suit the conscripted soldiers. The American commandos spotted them a long way off and concealed themselves in an abandoned barn near the road. It proved an excellent vantage point as the Japs moved past on the shoreline below. The Allied commander called out, "Halt and surrender!" The Jap soldiers froze, glancing around the source of the loud command. Lieutenant Kodama got a shot off in the general direction of the building before the Yanks cut him down with rapid fire. The other Japanese dropped to the ground or behind trees when they heard the Americans shout. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" The youngest recruit stood up and walked toward them with his hands in the air. "Traitor!" screamed the sergeant as he lifted his rifle and shot the boy in the back of the neck. Eyes bulging, the startled lad fell forward, gurgling through his last breath. The Americans needed no further excuse. Hand grenades landed between the rocks, sheltering the frightened Japanese. All the U.S. troops had to do was wait a few seconds. They saw the effects of the blast before they heard the noise. The explosion threw body parts out into the open. Then it was quiet. The Yanks approached with caution, rifles ready. They needn't have worried. There was no life left in the bloody remains strewn over the beach and road. The Allies dug a deep pit and left the unmarked grave at the roadside. It is still undiscovered to this day. The door slammed and the window shook as he stormed in the house. Where is she?" he demanded of the first mate he saw. "Sir, she is in the garden. Shall I fetch her?" "No, just tell her I'm home. Tell her to come up later." The petrified girl nodded and ran off as the weary politician climbed the stairs. As he walked into the spacious, carpeted bathroom, the scent of lavender reached him. Glimmering scented candles surrounding the heart-shaped jacuzzi caught his eye. The aromatic steam rose from the warm, silky, oil-laced water. He smiled both in anticipation and remembrance. The scented oil was relaxing. Reminiscences of the exciting evening just a few weeks ago came to mind. Chloe, his partner, was often away. He made the most of her absences. Household staff were used to seeing his other girls come and go. Pastel beige drapes bordered the panoramic windows. He took pleasure in surveying his vast estates. Removing his brown leather shoulder holster with the pistol still secured inside, he donned his silk robe. He draped his gun over the back of a chair near the window. Music pervaded the air from speakers secreted in the walls. Celine Dion's "My Heart Will Go On." The elegant surroundings were the fruits of his many business interests, including smuggling, illegal gambling, prostitution, and more. He selected a bottle of, I have no idea, Lejean Nebbiolo, an old and fine red Italian wine from the rack in the alcove. The senator prided himself on his knowledge of vintage wine, boasting an inviolable collection. After uncorking it, he poured himself a generous glass. Usually he would decant it first to let it breathe. He was too impatient tonight. He strolled to the large window. Before him were well-tended lawns between beds of roses and bougainvillea. Gazing for a few minutes over the fish pools in his private garden helped to calm and relax him. Ornamental palm trees provided shade for the small wooden chairs and tables spaced throughout the symmetrical enclosure. The water level rose as he eased himself into the spacious tub, touching a discreet button on the side. The quiet motor beneath responded with a hum. Bubbles emerged from nozzles in the bottom and sides of the bath, gently massaging his legs and back. He sank into the depths of the bath, closing his eyes. Senator Enrique Consuela was tough, very tough. You would not want him as an enemy. Physically, he could easily be mistaken for a kindly grandfather, but the senator had a deserved reputation as a ruthless warlord. However, he was also bright and well educated, with an admirable political skill. So far, he has shown much better judgment than his predecessors. He was in good shape for his age, slim and with dyed black hair which made him look younger than his 65 years. Despite his ruthlessness, he believed he was a good man. In truth, he was not all bad. He could be generous when the occasion demanded. He took care of his staff like a benevolent grandfather, often paying long-term employees unofficial pensions and shouldering medical and funeral expenses. This was the way in this lawless third world paradise. Serious health problems had caused him to reevaluate his life, but he still believed it was his destiny to become the president of the Philippines before he left this world. Taking diet and exercise seriously now. Bubble jets were now up to maximum strength. The gentle massage was very pleasant. The bathroom boasted moldings in Italian style with the most expensive gold-plated imported fittings. Chloe, his partner, had a good eye for design. She was a beautiful, intelligent girl, less than half his age. As always, she organized the scented candles for the room and arranged for someone to draw the bath when she knew he was coming. After soaking for 30 minutes, he rose through the foam, dried himself, and put on his robe, then settled into his favorite armchair. He was dozing as Chloe arrived with an inlaid wooden tray with chamomile tea, part of his strict health regimen. The senator has suffered a heart attack. He nearly died 2 years before. Ever since then, he followed medical advice and felt fitter now than before his collapse. Chloe had an admirable body. The flimsy gown she wore stressed her curves. She tied the sash loosely at the waist, and the senator admired her as she sashayed across the room. He wondered if she was wearing anything under the robe. She tied the sash, he was about to find out. They'd been together for years now, but he had never grown tired of her. As she came over to him and sat on his lap, the gown fell open. Smiling, she cupped his face and kissed him as she sat astride him. "I've missed you so much," she whispered. She smelled wonderful, fresh flower tones, just as he liked. As she parted her legs, he saw she'd shaved herself in anticipation. She looked very fresh and inviting. "I see you've missed me too," she smiled, looking down at him. "I see you've missed me too," she smiled, looking down at him. He grinned as his robe parted and she took hold of him. "This is what you need, sweetheart," she breathed into his ear as she raised herself. She held him, moving him up and down between her legs until natural lubrication eased her efforts. As the full extent of him filled her for the first time in many weeks, he thrust hard against her. She moved forcefully to grind herself against his body. He gripped her tightly until his juice flowed. She felt the gush and tensed to receive it. It was good. After a while, they sat down to talk and drink. Chloe was a bright girl with a degree in communications. In terms of his trusted associates and staff, she was near the top. She was a useful sounding board for his ideas, and he took her advice seriously. His commitment to her was long-term. She was the mother of his 2 youngest children. Despite his earlier health issues, Consuela was now working at a pace that would have exhausted a man half his age. But Chloe made it her job to make sure he relaxed whenever she could. She knew his faults, but was loyal and faithful. It was several weeks since she had seen him. She missed his strength and security. "Can I get you to cut my hair before we go, sweetheart?" "Yes, that's fine. I'll let him give me a trim too. I need to look my best." Oh, I think I got that backwards. "Can I get my hair cut before we go, sweetheart?" "Yes, that's fine. I'll let him give me a trim too. I need to look my best." Chloe rang downstairs, and in less than a minute, the slim figure in a tight-fitting short skirt crept into the room with a bag of hairdressing tools. "Hello, Jake," said Chloe. She had a lot of time for him. Life was difficult for baklas, gays who dressed as women, sometimes called ladyboys. Some could make themselves very attractive, as did Jake. But life was hard for them. They were often bullied and mistreated. Jake always wore attractive clothes. He took pills so his breasts would grow, but he still hadn't had everything he was born with. He had been with them for many years now. They trusted him. There were rumors he had a boyfriend at the estate, but no one knew for sure. He set about laying out his equipment. Chloe was first. No guidance was needed. He knew how they liked their hair to be styled. With a cheerful attitude and a sense of humor which made them both laugh, he was popular and never caused any trouble, so they retained him at the estate. When he wasn't helping with hair or makeup, he made himself useful in the kitchens. In 30 minutes they were done. Jake quickly exited, leaving the two alone again. "Shall we take him with us when we move to Manila?" asked Chloe. "Oh, yes, I think so. He's useful and fun to have around." Chloe smiled and nodded. It was time for work now. Manila was waiting. As the senator opened the bedroom door, he found two large packed suitcases in the hallway. "Good work," he said, smiling at her. "Packed already? You knew I was in a hurry." "You always are these days, sweetheart. No time for me anymore," she pouted. "We'll have time soon. We've got to get the election over. Then we can relax." Before she could reply, he shouted for guards to get the bags. The sleek black limousine was outside, engine running. Consuelo slid into the leather seats in the back. She jumped in beside him, and the driver shut the door behind her. They were on their way to the local airport. With just one runway, the airport in Benguet was used exclusively by the senator and his guests. The short strip was extended 2 years ago when he bought a large Boeing 737. Today they would be using one of his smaller jets. Airport staff came in only when needed, just a flight controller and an engineer, for a final check. They were waiting in the tower when he arrived. Despite his many international flights, there were no customs staff at the airport. This was a country where the rules did not apply to the rich. Within an hour, they were aloft and halfway to Manila. "Can't you keep her any steadier?" the white-faced Consuela barked at his harassed pilot as the small plane took yet another dive into an air pocket. "Sorry, sir," replied the timid young man, the most junior of the senator's three pilots. "We're going light this time, sir. The plane is being blown around more than usual. The wind is much stronger than usual." "I know that," he barked. The plane lurched and he fell sideways against the toilet door. He made his way back to his seat and his sick bag. The tail end of Typhoon Maria was still creating winds, causing turbulence for the small 16-seater plane. The senator felt queasy as the light aircraft bobbed about in the gale. Jagged ridges of the Cordillera Mountains in the north of the province below seemed too close. The razor-like peaks resembled the edge of a saw. They seemed to go on forever. It was a relief when they touched down at Manila Domestic Airport 60 minutes later. The black Ford Expedition was waiting for them on the side of the runway. Consuelo ran down the exit stairs as soon as the plane was secured into the back of the waiting car. Chloe followed close behind. His driver saluted and sharply closed the door after them. Reporters and photographers were gathered at the airport entrance as usual. The car had to slow down to ease through them. He and Chloe smiled and waved. The couple were used to this now. Consuelo's celebrity status had soared since he declared as a presidential candidate. "Welcome home, sir," said the driver, an older man and faithful servant for over 20 years. "Thank you, Edward. I'm glad to be back. Is Simon at the house yet?" "Yes, sir. He showed up the day before yesterday." Simon, his secretary and general fixer, had been taking care of some election rigging in the southern islands. The senator and Chloe arrived at his Manila mansion just before 2 p.m. after the short drive through the busy traffic. Their city home was a spacious mansion in a tree-lined gated community in Bel Air, home to most of the Philippine elite. The lanes of the dual carriageway within the area were clean and smooth, with tall coconut palms adorning the central reservation interspersed with mature banana plants. A lone road sweeper dragged his trolley along the dusty path. The car turned left as the electronic gates parted to allow them in. Even in a street of outstanding homes, there stood out, painted white with a red tiled roof, the 22-room mansion with armed guards stationed on the corners were imposing. The staff knew he'd need a rest when he arrived. His room was ready. Power napping had become a thing for him. He was soon asleep on the soft covers. Philippine presidential elections are held every 6 years. The next one was in just a few days now. Consuelo knew that he didn't make it this time. He probably never would. The senator's former friend, President Bautista, was standing for a second term, although he was widely unpopular and expected to lose. A not so small fortune sat in foreign banks waiting for him just in case. If he lost, he would get out of the country while he still could. His successor would certainly try to call him to account for his crimes. Earlier, he had swept to power on a ticket of anti-corruption, but his promises were now seen to be hollow, and his methods had proved questionable, with his war on drugs resulting in thousands of extrajudicial killings. In truth, the war on corruption and the fight against drugs was a smokescreen to protect his own bribery, extortion, and illegal drug dealing, and eliminate his opposition. The international community could see what was happening, and sanctions were put in place, making him even more unpopular at home. Senator Consuelo's power base was in Umbra, northern Luzon. He'd spent time cultivating his image, but there was no real worries in his home state. The Consuelo clan had run the state for generations and held all top positions within their family or in their patronage. However, in the last few months, he'd begun working with highly paid U.S. advisors to ensure that to most of the country, he seemed softer and more intellectual. He now cultivated a more statesman-like, benevolent persona. It was working so far. He was climbing the popularity charts, but there were still a few days to go. From now until Election Day, he just had to keep his nose clean and his election machine well oiled and supplied. To date, he has spent over $20 million, mostly undeclared, and he knew there would be more to pay. His resources were diminishing, and this concerned him greatly. Finding more money was his priority. The lavish party being organized downstairs was all about consolidating support and raising money. I could feel my voice. He was pondering his problems when Simon rang. The call brought him back to reality. Guests were starting to arrive. He was needed. He had arranged for the most important guest of the evening to arrive early. The well-dressed man strode to the short distance from his car to the front door, which opened as he arrived, 2 bodyguards following. He was dapper, overweight, and shorter than his host. The senator wore his best smile as Vice President Arturo Ramos entered the hall. Ramos looked up, returned the senator's grin, and warmly clasped the outstretched hand with both of his own. His old patron, the president, had used and abused the former television presenter. Ramos was counting the days until the election. Welcome, my dear friend, enthused the senator, continuing to shake the man's hand a tad longer than was necessary. Ramos previously had his own plans to stand for election, which were spoiled by the incumbent's dirty tricks. When the president found out, he unleashed a torrent of news and fake news about the man's drinking, womanizing, illegal gambling, and consorting with foreign agents to the press. Ramos was not too bright and allowed himself to be caught in compromising situations. When copies of his bank account surfaced showing millions in undeclared wealth and deposits from Russian and Chinese sources, he was sunk. But he still had a small, loyal following he would put at Consuelo's disposal. Consuelo led him through to the small office next to the meeting room, where he offered him the nearest chair. The senator wasted no time. Arturo, you do not deserve what has happened to you, my friend. I will find a way for you to reclaim your place. He leaned over and took the man's arm conspiratorially. The president has taken a tight control on the media. You know he has done that deliberately to keep you out. You are a threat to him. Arturo nodded. It'll be one of my first acts to give the newspapers and the television stations their independence again, and I want you to be part of my new vision. It'll be one of my first acts to give the newspapers and the television stations their independence again, and I want you to be part of my new vision. The VP looked up. I'd like to install you as chairman of the Philippine Broadcasting Company. The PBC controlled and regulated the growing number of television and radio stations in the country. As a former broadcaster, Arturo Ramos would be back in a world he knew and at the top of it. It was an irresistible offer. And to emphasize how important I consider the media to be, you'll also be a special presidential advisor, one of only 12 people. The vice president couldn't hide his delight. He thought he'd get the chair of the PBC, but not this, the elevated station of special presidential advisor. You'll have my full support, my friend, Arturo guessed. Reaching forward to clasp Consuelo's hand firmly once again, it was a win-win for the senator. He was now assured of Ramos's support and put him into a situation where he could do little damage, and he certainly didn't intend to take any advice from him. The vice president got up from his chair. This calls for a drink. The two men drank like old friends. Consuelo nodded at the appropriate places while the vice president rambled on, condemning the current administration and anyone else he could think for his problems. Consuelo had heard it all before. After 20 minutes, the senator made his excuse. He had to prepare for the party. Ramos remained, now very merry, with a large glass of whiskey and the rest of the bottle close by. Okay. The gathering would start at 6. It would likely be the last meeting of his group before the election. They all had work to do in their own way over the coming days. As more guests began to arrive, uniformed catering staff met them at the door, offering water and juice. Large amounts of alcohol drinks would flow after the short business of the day was over. Maids showed them into a plush side room to await the others. When they were all assembled, Simon ushered them into the boardroom. The ornate mahogany table stood pride of place with 20 equal ornate chairs. The senator and a groggy vice president stood by the door to greet them. Everyone at the party was a well-known public figure. There was an air of celebration, exactly what the senator was trying to achieve. Dear friends, we're nearly there. Nothing can stop us now. I know many of you have already worked hard on my behalf, and I thank you. He raised his glass around the table. They nodded and toasted each other. He glanced at his guest, making eye contact with each one of his as he spoke. When I started my campaign, many said I had no chance. It's thanks to you and other like-minded people who've recognized the need for a change I've managed to get this far. The serious tone of his speech caused the room to fall silent. The senator intended. He had their full attention. I must give you a word of caution. We are entering the most dangerous part of the race now. Many people will try to stop us, to expose any skeletons, real or imagined. Please be on your guard for these last few days. Then we can all relax. We can reap our rewards. He raised his glass again. Here's to success, he proclaimed. The assembled guests cheered and again toasted each other. When the chatter in the room subsided, the senator resumed. I want to pass you over to now over now to my good friend, the Vice President of the Republic of the Philippines. Ramos stood to speak. He was an imposing figure and an accomplished speaker, even when under the influence of alcohol. He put his arm around the senator, hugged him, and smiled. Then that said it all. But they expected more, and Ramos gave it to them. I'm among friends here tonight, so I can be frank. We know the country needs the man we've pledged to support as the next president. Unlike the present incumbent, he knows about loyalty. He is with the people and has the interest of the country as his first priority. In a few days, we'll be celebrating their victory. Ramos praised Consuela for another 5 minutes. He told the assembled dignitaries that if there were any problems, all they had to do was pick up the phone. He finished by giving them his private cell number. Loud applause and a pat on the back from the senator came as Consuelo stood to reply. As a humble politician, I'm proud to be in the company of such eminent people here tonight. My vision of our great country is one of prosperity and equality, and to regain our dignity in the eyes of the international community. There were some somber nods around the table. Consuelo introduced Simon, who stood and smiled. The senator made it clear to them that his secretary was available to them day or night. He'd call each of them daily with updates on the campaign. Simon shook his boss's hand as he sat. Simon outlined the weaknesses, what needed to be done, and where the campaign needed support. More effort. The church was not yet behind the senator. He needed the bishop's help. He didn't mention the urgent need for more cash. That would make the boss look weak. The Archbishop of Manila had made comments about Consuelo's links to illegal gambling, which, in truth, funded half of his enterprises. Public denials helped, but over the next few days, the cleric must be persuaded to be less vocal in his opposition to the senator. The Catholic Church in the Philippines was strong politically with support at all levels of society. It held to early ideology inherited from the time of the Spanish occupation. The only way to end a marriage was by annulment, apart from killing your spouse. Both were popular, but the latter choice was cheaper. With little danger of prosecution, it was widely practiced. Most of the national daily newspaper came round to endorsing Consuelo. The owners, editors, and senior journalists enjoyed the largesse of the wealthy senator. Major television channels stayed mainly neutral, as the incumbent was unlikely to win. He was currently trailing in third place. They were also pleased with rumors that Ramos would soon be back working in the media. It was uncomfortable being under the thumb of President Bautista. Ramos would be much easier man to manipulate. Okay. The army was solidly behind his campaign. They were comfortable with the blatant lawlessness allowed by the administration. They weren't comfortable with the blatant lawlessness allowed by the current administration. Consuelo asked the senior servicemen present for details of officers who supported him. They'd ensure the military vote went his way. Each of them would receive a discreet phone call from Consuelo and an early Christmas present. The National Police Chief wrote a similar list. Police General Estrada served for 35 years after a short military career. He was 6 months from the retirement of his election, would provide a substantial boost. I lost my place. He was 6 months from retirement, and his election would provide a substantial boost to his pension fund. Consuelo promised better pay and conditions to his men, especially the recruits who received little and relied on bribes to survive. It was easy to sell Consuelo as the new president to his officers. The mayor of Manila, Manuel de also suffered under the current leadership. The president took away control of planning decisions. This was a major loss of income. Bautista had also taken away the lucrative issuance of business permits. Consuelo would return both to them. DeSena had already received some compensation from Consuelo. He would deliver many thousands of votes from those who lived and worked in the nation's business capital. The senator's face, an airbrushed, much younger-looking version, smiled out at commuters with giant billboards on public buildings all over the city. Harry Chua, one of the richest men in the Philippines, supported Consuelo through his senatorial race and bankrolled him for a large share of the election cost. His family fortune dated back to the Marcos era. Consuelo's and Harry's parents had been good friends, but were both dead now. Family loyalty meant everything to a Filipino. Consuelo thanked him for his support, a gesture that would convey to the meeting that money was no object for the campaign. They could all expect rich rewards at the end. The senator spoke again. I will need the help of every one of you to implement the policies of our country so desperately needed. The group was silent again. I know you share my beliefs and visions, and I appreciate I can rely on you to play your part. As he looked around the table, his expression changed. His face relaxed, and a broad smile graced his face. And now, my friends, it's party time. Enjoy yourselves tonight. You are among friends. Tomorrow we'll work in earnest as we come up to the wire, but tonight we'll play. One girl with an empty tray took up position by the door. Consuelo nodded to her as he spoke to his guest. Please leave your phones on the tray. You'll get them back after the party. We don't want any secret filming going on tonight, do we? With perfect timing, the side door burst open. Attractive serving girls wheeled in a lavish buffet. Wine and spirits with mixers and ice arrived on two further trolleys. Gradually, the guests wandered to the more comfortable drawing room with sofas and coffee tables. There were bottles of whiskey and brandy on every table. Chloe joined Consuelo. He smiled and gave her a quick hug. Good job, he whispered in her ear. Is the entertainment arranged? Of course. I selected the girls myself, and they're all sexy and discreet. He laughed. I knew I could rely on you, as always. Well done. Have the elections gone now? She nodded. I checked the rooms. Everything works. Everything is fine. He kissed her on the lips. I couldn't manage without you. Thank you, sweetheart. I love you so much. She meant it. And that's the end. Thank you.